Thank you for joining Customer Loyalty and Personalization, the future of retail in a cookieless world. We will be joined by Laura Carrier, who has worked for top retailers such as Saks Fifth Avenue and Macy's, and is currently a retail industry advisor to Sale-Through in the data and measurement space. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now here's your host, Ken Fenyo, President of Research and Advisory at Coresight Research.
Thank you very much, Mara, and thanks everyone for attending today. I'm really excited about this topic. There's two things that I'm more passionate about than loyalty and personalization. It's really increasingly an important topic. As changes have happened in the world of cookies and with data privacy, first-party data from retailers and brands is really increasingly important. But the key thing is it's not really enough to collect it. It's really what you do with it. And the ability to use data to create personalized and relevant experiences for consumers is really going to be more and more important as we move forward. I'm thrilled to have Laura here today from Sale-Through. We're going to have a great conversation. We've actually done a bunch of really recent research we've done 2 surveys with consumers and 1 with businesses and retailers and brands in the UK and the US. We're going to share some of those results today and really dig into a little bit about how consumers and retailers have different perceptions of personalization. We'll look at some of the changes in cookies and data privacy, as well as talk about loyalty programs and what's working and what's not. So with that, I'm really excited to get going here. We have a few slides we're going to talk through, so let's jump right in. The first one we want to talk about is this Retail Personalization Index. This is a index that Sale-Through had created that we worked with them on this year that really tries to look at how well do retailers deliver personalized experiences to their shoppers and their consumers. What you can see this year is a few big brands that you probably know well on the list, as well as maybe some brands you don't know as well. So number 1 is Thrive Market and Sephora. We also see brands like DSW, Best Buy, Adidas, but then some smaller brands or some growing brands like Fabletics, First Dibs, Just Fab on the list as well. So it's a real mix between well-known brands and some maybe smaller up-and-coming brands you're not as familiar with. And let's start off with the first question. Laura, curious, what does it take to get onto the top of this list? What are these guys doing right that sort of ranks them high on the RPI?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. Glad to be on. That is a really good question. And fortunately, because of the research that Coresight and Sale-Through did with both consumers and retail marketers, we're able to really look at every single one of the 500 brands that we assessed and evaluate them based on very specific personalization criteria and understand what's important to consumers today and what are they asking for in the personalization space. And these brands, all of these brands that are up here, they have different business models, different products. As you mentioned, some are newer, some are older and existing. They have different price points, et cetera. But what each of them does similarly is focus on that one-to-one relationship with the brand. And when I say one-to-one, a lot of retailers and brands think about the one side being me, the brand, but they forget about the other side that you have to have in a relationship, which is a give and take, and that's the customer. And so these brands ask the same 4 questions. I know they do, because when we run this evaluation, we don't just think about, just email marketing or just app. We look at it across the entire board of where retailers and brands can engage with customers. All of those engagements, all of those signals, all of those communications, from loyalty to offline to email to mobile, to text, which is up and coming, and we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. But all of them really ask the same 4 questions, which is, what is the value to the customer? What is the value to me, the brand? And then what is the aspect of the customer that I need to understand more in order to provide that value? And what is the aspect of the brand that the customer would benefit from understanding more? And this is key to everything that all of these retailers and brands implement across all the various different categories that I mentioned. And what we found out of this year's RPI, and every year is different. Sale-Through has been running this for 5 years, so this is the 5th year anniversary, and every year has nuances to the insights and findings that come out of it. But what we found out of this year is there were 3 key differentiating factors between the ones who did very well and then the ones who were lower down in the RPI, and that is loyalty, orchestration, and convenience. And when we talk about loyalty, Sephora is a great example of this. Their loyalty program is amazing. It really offers the value to the consumer out there, and everything that they ask for in terms of data, they're offering a requisite value for that consumer. Things like their birthday program. They don't just ask for birthday, because everyone who's in retail marketing knows that helps with identity resolution. It's a great way to, be able to understand that customer a little bit more, but they ask for it in order to truly provide a value to the customer. In their entire birthday month, they get discounts and offers, and on their birthday, they get additional, products, etc. So, and even actually, Sephora does an amazing job of just going beyond the discounts and offering what today's loyalty is about, which is different than yesterday's loyalty. And it's about creating experience. It's about creating emotion. It's about really connecting with the consumer on shared values, offering things such as VIP services, VIP access, or personalized services, or the ability to be involved in the brand. Michaels is a brand I just had the opportunity to chat with recently, and they do an amazing job with their creators, whether they're in their most loyal customer base or not. They do a phenomenal job of pulling those customers in and those creators in, and really engendering that loyalty with those individual specific creators, and then throughout their community by offering that user-generated content on their website and apps, etc. When we talk about orchestration, which is the other key, the second key area, is that's really about not just orchestrating within marketing or just orchestrating within sales, which is what I hear a lot of retailers and brands thinking about. They're differentiating the two, usually because that's how their teams are organized. So it's fair, but we really want to try to mix those going forward, this blending of content and commerce, orchestration of all of your marketing channels and all of your sales channels, and then marketing and sales together. So First Dibs does a phenomenal job with this. They, as we see, made it up to number 7 on the list with a score of 56 this year, which is awesome. They do a concerted effort on personalization. So things like when an email goes out that's talking or that's showcasing living room products, they might have content on there from a celebrity's living room and have that celebrity, talking about how they created that living room and what inspiration they used. And then they might have another piece of content on there that talks to how you can create the best living room and the various different components, how to hang your pictures above your sofa or whatever it is, that they're focused on for that specific set of products. So again, that personalized communication, orchestration across channel, and that blending of content and commerce when we talk about orchestration. And orchestration isn't just about messaging. It's also about the third component that we talk about, which is convenience. So things like sharing your cart across channels or sharing login across channels. That's personalization in that, okay, now I see I was browsing this 2 weeks ago. I still see it available, or 2 days ago, I still see it available when I go onto website, even though I was looking on it on app. Nordstrom does a phenomenal job of convenience and orchestration, from browsing to delivery through to post-purchase. They really think about the entire customer journey and where those personalization touch points should be and where that convenience needs to be created. Returns. In retail, it is one of the most annoying areas. And Nordstrom, and actually Target has also mastered this as well, have mastered that, making that returns as easy as possible. And hopefully everyone who's on this call knows this because you guys are probably likely all retailers and brands, but your highest purchasers are also your highest returners. So when you make returning convenient, you make purchasing more convenient. So if you can make that component of it personalized, easy, convenient, then you can win on the purchasing side as well.
That's great. It's interesting. I would pick up one theme that I really like. It's how the personalization and loyalty have really changed over the last 5, certainly 10 years. But the idea is it used to be more transactional, right? I bought A, I'm going to get an offer for B, or maybe I'll get an offer for the competitor to what I just bought. And I think really you hit it well, which is it's really much more now about the experience. And that could include some monetary benefits, but it's really a lot more. It's really that whole way you interact with your consumers. And if we change gears for a second and look a little bit about how consumers and retailers perceive what excellence in personalization means, we can see a couple things really jump out at me. This is an analysis we did here, but retailers generally think they're doing great for the most part, right? So if you look, like 71% of retailers think they excel in personalizing their marketing. The challenge is that consumers don't really see it that way. Only 34% of consumers agree with that. And you see across the board, though, I did want to point out, when you look at the consumer side, again, you see a lot of ways that are important to consumers in terms of their personalization. So service, website, product offering, and all. Now, before we move, Laura, I'm going to ask you a question. I do want everyone to know, you may have seen a poll popped up, a few questions we were hoping to ask. You have a few minutes to fill this in, but if you can, just answer the poll questions. We'll come at the end and see where everyone came out in terms of the polls, but definitely take a second to answer them. And but with that, let's turn back to this idea of this mismatch between how retailers and consumers see personalization. And, I'm just curious, what do you think is causing the gap? I mean, does it link at all to changes in cookies or privacy, or is it something else going on? But what do you think is driving that difference?
Yeah. This was actually one of the most interesting stats that came out of the research we did. So I'm glad you're kind of pointing this out. But I think like anything in the measurement world, which is an area I work in a ton, it's a multivariate set of factors that have led to this shift. The first is the pandemic. Everyone's very familiar with the fact that consumer behaviors have significantly shifted. What we've seen is that, these trends were already happening. We were talking about a lot of these shifts before the pandemic, but they've exponentially changed over a much shorter period of time. So it hasn't let retailers and brands have the time to catch up to being where the consumer is today. So the consumer has these demands and these expectations. And as retail marketers, and frankly, not just marketers across the entire retail organization, we're still working on playing catch up and trying to get, all of those shifts in place in order to meet the consumer where they are. I think the second one, you hit the nail on the head, is really with the privacy headwinds. As marketers, we have laid our foundations on data, and we should on that customer data. But as those foundations shift, GDPR went into place, CCPA, when we're talking about America, as well as all the other, I think it's 5 to 6 other states have implemented their own right now. We have further states which are reviewing that. We have iOS changes. We have Google third-party cookie deprecation. There's also, for anyone who follows privacy, there's a lot going on in the context of potential shifts to IP address, IDFA, to Google Android as well. That'll be similar to Apple iOS. So it's very difficult if your entire foundation is built on customer data. As those shifts happen, it's very difficult to understand where you can meet the consumer where they want to be in terms of their expectations, and where you can still deal with, the privacy regulations and headwinds that are coming forward, and make sure you're being smart about that, especially as they're constantly changing. So I think that's the second factor in it. The third one is really technology advancements and expansion. Some technologies, such as cloud computing, have been around for a while, but their rapid expansion has meant that they can meet more complex use cases, and they're adopted more widely now. So it's not just about those advancements, but also that expansion of them. And AI and ML are also great examples, which enable personalized communications, presentations, experiences, that things like dynamic pricing, or potentially offers based on customer service calls, et cetera, all of that will continue to evolve as technology advances and expands. And some of the fourth contributing factor has to do with what I just mentioned on the AI ML front. Some of that is not visible to the consumer. So it's impossible for a consumer to say, hey, you're doing really well on something that they have no idea exists. They don't know the level of effort that's required, and all the technologies that have to go into it, all the strategies, tactics, et cetera, to get a personalized product, all of the data attributes assigned to that product, as well as the customer data, in order to get that, personalized experience on the website. So I do think, all of those influence that gap when we talk about that. Going back to kind of the cookie portion of it, and what's changing on the data side, because data is foundational to any capability that we can do. I think there will continue to be the shift towards first party and zero party data and away from third party. And that means that, we have shifts on the advertising side as well as on the marketing side because of that going on. And I think we can go a little bit more into the data portion later. But certainly there are significant changes going on that side that lead to this shift between consumers and retailers.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think maybe a quick follow-up. I mean, I'm guessing in terms of the gap getting reduced, right? Because there's that mismatch. I do think it's always interesting that it's the good and the bad of these new technologies, right? They're bringing new capabilities, but at the same time, consumers' expectations keep increasing. So I don't know. I guess in terms of closing the gap, it's probably more around, how do retailers adapt both the capabilities and the technologies, or do you think there's something else that's missing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we get this asked all the time. And actually, that's honestly why the RPI was created. It's a tool that hundreds of retailers and brands use because it is influenced, or not influenced, it's built upon 5,000 consumers and their opinions of what's important today. Retail marketers, close to 300 retail marketer executives, what their opinions of what's effective, what's going on, what's going to happen in the future. And then we also have a retail advisory board, which consists of executives from multiple different brands, going in and taking a look at it and also saying what's going to happen in the future, because you can't just have it as a consumer. We often think about, where am I today? What do I want right now? We're not thinking about, hey, Google third-party cookies are going to be going away in a year. What does that mean? So we need to have that view into what's going to happen going forward. So the RPI was created just to help reduce that gap. It's literally a list that retailers and brands go in and look of those 80 attributes and say, hey, how do my strategic priorities in personalization match up to each of these attributes? And the ones that are weighted heavily by consumers get higher points. And the ones that we think are going to be more important for the future are things that we call table stakes for 2023. Where do I rate against those? What are my work efforts aligned to in terms of that? And I just did 2 of these evaluations for brands yesterday, where we actually go through line by line and say, hey, these are the ones where you did really well. This is the areas you really need to focus on, and here's why, and here's what's important. So that's how to reduce the gap. I mean, focus on personalization, understand what's important, make use of the RPI, because it is something that we've created for every retailer and brand out there that Sailthrough has created, to really be able to understand what's important.
That's awesome. Hey, we do have a question that came in asking if we were going to cover customization in this talk, and I'd say the answer is we will, and it'll definitely be threaded in the questions, and then certainly at the end we can answer any more specific follow-ups folks may have. But why don't we move on and talk a little bit about some of the marketing vehicles? And again, interestingly, you see a bit of a mismatch when we ask consumers and retailers in terms of how do you want to receive this personalized marketing. Interestingly, consumers still really like email, right up there at the top, along with websites. Whereas, for retailers, maybe they're a bit tired of it, or I'm over email. It's no longer interesting. And I know you mentioned text, which I've heard a lot recently. People really reinvesting back in text. It was, I'm not sure it quite worked the first time around, but it does seem like there's renewed interest. So I was curious a little bit if you talk a little bit more about how email and maybe now SMS kind of fit into these campaigns, and is there any sort of cases you see where it works very well, and how maybe retailers and brands should think about, particularly around email, which seems to be so popular with consumers?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I want to distinguish a little bit here between personalization and the channel you're using. So I spoke a minute ago about consent, and that is important to this. So as a consumer, if I have consented to receive marketing from you and I've provided zero-party data to you such that I know that I have to provide you my email if you're going to email to me, then I expect a value in exchange for that. And personalization is what they expect. They do not want to get, an email for diapers if you're, 30-year-old single man living in, wherever, and you have no kids and you're not married. It's just not relevant. So personalization increases engagement, and email, because it automatically relies on that zero-party data, is one of the number one places where, tied with website again. And website is because most consumers are thinking about, okay, when I log in, I'm on that website. You understand, they're at least familiar with cookies and the fact that they can track and understand all of that, even if you haven't logged in as well. They want that personalization aspect when they've consented to it. So whereas we think about social media and we think about, other areas where there isn't that kind of high expectation, because we haven't really consented to that with the advertiser. We've consented to that with, the social media platform that we're engaging with, but not directly with the advertiser. And that's actually a lot of the objections on the privacy side, is that difference between zero party, first party, second party, and third party. And in this case, a third party would be the advertiser. So I think the other part is exactly what you mentioned in terms of, retailers have had email for a long time, so they forget that, hey, this isn't the shiny new thing, but we've had email without the capabilities. I spoke about technology earlier. Everything that is being connected and orchestrated and made capable in terms of synchronous conversations, in terms of convenience, in terms of personalization, is because of technology and those capabilities, which we didn't have yesterday. I mean, I don't know many brands that are doing that. One example I mentioned about, offering products or specific services based on customer service calls. We're not there yet as a world, but we will eventually get there. But we are there in much more tailored ways with a lot of the channels that we have today. So some of the leaders in the space, Adidas does a phenomenal job with email. They're always thinking about personalization of the brand. I spoke earlier about that one-to-one relationship. So they are personalizing their brand, offering up who they are as a brand in exchange for asking the customer to share who they are as a person. They also do personalization via community. They do a great job with UGC and reviews and sharing of who their community is via all of their marketing. They let the consumer be involved with opt-in options. So I spoke about convenience earlier. So allowing me as a consumer to say, hey, I want to engage with you, but these are the ways I want to engage with you. I want to engage on these specific channels, not these. I want to engage with you at this specific amount of time, per week or per whatever period of time, not this other way. And I want to engage with you based on these products. So offering those optionalities and those in terms of cadence, channel, product are important for personalization relationships. Nordstrom with their Nordy Pod, I don't know how many of you guys have seen that, but that's another amazing example of personalization of the brand. They have executives from Nordstrom, associates in the store, brands and labels that they work with, speaking on the podcast about themselves, sharing their histories, their stories, their experiences with anyone who's listening, which includes, Nordstrom customers, in order to really share who they are as a brand and who their brands are that make up Nordstrom. Additionally, I would say there are retailers and brands that are employing tactics that we consider table stakes for today. So things like welcome series. A lot of retailers and brands have welcome series, but they just have one email, or they aren't doing enough in terms of that content and commerce that I spoke about earlier. So things like, I'm not just going to push the fact that, hey, welcome to my brand, I have all these products, but these are also all of the various different ways that you can style that product, or do your hair if you're going to a wedding, or, have a wedding shower. I've seen that on some of the blogs recently for ones that are related to selling dresses, et cetera. So scaling those communications with engagements. You mentioned text, and yes, that is a giant growth area for retail and brand. It's one of the things we see as table stakes for 2023. If you're not experimenting with it this year, please do get on board with it. DSW is a great one who right now I saw that they are using it as part of their loyalty program. So that's a great thing because not only are they piloting and testing out with their most loyal customers, but they're scaling the engagement with those customers that they know want to engage with them more. So text is awesome for Gen Z, any retailers or brands who have a strong audience there, but we're seeing that shift for millennials and older generations as well. They're getting more comfortable with it. And by 2023, they will be there. Transactional text kind of were leaders into that, but now it's getting into the marketing side as well.
Great. Well, why don't we move on and talk a little bit about this idea of a value exchange, which we'll get into. But when you look at consumers, everyone's definitely concerned about data privacy, not really a big surprise. But what we do find is consumers are very willing to share data when they feel they're getting value back. And so when you look at the survey, about 81% said they're willing to share data with a trusted brand. And frankly, even 67% are still willing to trade it with a new brand. And in both of those are assuming you're getting back some value for it. So Laura, maybe why don't we turn for a second to this idea of this value exchange and, how do retailers get going in a way that how do they think about providing value? Because what they want to do is they want to get data from the consumer so they can then use that to make the experience better. But how do you get that flywheel started?
Yeah, Ken, this is a question I love. Data being foundational, as I mentioned, to every personalization effort. I don't care how sophisticated your algorithms or your personalization strategies are. If your core data isn't there, then it won't be effective. So there are a few key practices that we learned from this research. The first one we spoke about a minute ago. You have to create that value exchange with the consumer and offer them something for the data. The second one is embedding of that trust. So you can build up trust over time, but you don't have trust the first time you engage with someone unless you offer that up in exchange. So things like not clicking, the options already for marketing. It's just an annoying thing for a consumer to have to unclick. If they want to engage with you and market with you, they're going to click on that. But for them to have to unclick, that's kind of like a little thing against trust. So all of those nuances, while yes, it might increase your acquisition and list growth, it's going to increase your unsubscribe rate eventually as well, because a lot of consumers don't even realize it's already clicked off. And unless they intentionally want to do that, and this is where I go back to consent, like the basis of everything you are doing in this space should be built upon creating that value, creating that trust, which is via consent. And then third is trying to eliminate those barriers to entry. And this was a big learning that came out of this, and with a lot of the conversations we're having with brands today, is that if you ask for everything all at once, it's very hard to offer the value anyways for that, but you get a strong cutoff in terms of people not being willing to provide all of that data. So Thrive Market is a great example of that. In order to offer personalization, they actually relatively need a larger amount of information. But they ask the core questions that they need to ask, and the next ones are optional. So if the consumer wants to answer them to get increased value and personalization out of it immediately, great. If they don't want to, they can always come back and answer it later, or they can never answer it at all. But they're consistently asking for those for that data as the relationship progresses. So that progressive asking of information while you're creating that value is key to doing a good job in terms of navigating it and encouraging those customers to actually share that data with you. Another one who does a great job of this is Fashion Nova. Their on-site modals ask for email, but offer up a significant enough discount. They don't just say, hey, give me your email. They're offering up a significant enough discount for it to mean something, as well as they ask for just one other piece of information, which is product category of interest, which means that their very first email to you is going to be personalized enough to create relevance. Yes, it would be amazing to have tons of other information, or even 3 or 4 other pieces of information in order to have the most personalized email. But as that engagement scales is when you progressively ask for more information from them, such that you can be more personalized with them. So I think those are kind of the 3 most important elements to being effective of asking for that data. Another one, in terms of optionality is, and that going back to that convenience side of things and the opt-in side of it, is Fabletics has this concept of you call the shots, where you get to choose how and when you want to be marketed to, which I spoke to earlier as well. And the reality is that as we shift away from, third-party data towards zero-party, first-party data, we have a limited period of time to ensure that we're putting ourselves in the right spot. Cookie deprecation is around the corner. So we need to be focused on building those right foundations today with our consumers. I spoke to a brand recently that said, yes, I want to have a preference center. It's on my list, of things to do. I don't know when I'm going to ever get to it. And my response is that data is not sexy. It's not the thing that usually gets prioritized number one, but you can't do any of those kind of sexier projects if you don't have your data in order, if you don't have that already in place. And by the way, consumers, as we're seeing here, will give it to you if you create that value and if you ask them in the right way. So you're not creating that value or distrust.
Right. Why don't we, I know we're running a little short on time. Why don't we, let's address this last point quickly, and then maybe we'll have time for the poll and the questions. But let's talk a bit about loyalty programs. We started a little at the front talking a bit about how loyalty fits in. We know people prefer it. Gen Z in particular seems to really like loyalty, is willing to share data, but overall, loyalty is a very common vehicle. I guess, though, the question is, who's really doing it well? Because it's easy to have a loyalty program. It's a lot harder to have a loyalty program that really adds value and drives the business forward. So curious if you have a few thoughts on that, Laura, and then we can, like I said, move on to some Q&A.
Yeah, I do actually. Loyalty is a big one. So many brands are hopping on this bandwagon and just not doing it effectively. And I think Home Depot and Best Buy are two great examples of loyalty programs, because they tailor their loyalty programs to their most valuable, their most loyal audience or customer segments. So Home Depot has a military program that's in a large percentage of their customer base, and a large percentage of their associates are military veterans or active. They have a military program which offers perks that are very specific to the military. So things like job skills and training when you get out of the military, help with building your house when you come out of it, grants towards that, discounts that are all the time if you join it. Now, this requires you to provide a lot of information to join this program. You have to prove you're in the military, which means a lot more information than joining any other loyalty program. But because their perks are so specific to that audience, it's really worth it, and there's a strong value to it. They also have their pros, or their professional loyalty program, those are two separate programs, but it's geared towards their professionals, which are, I think, close to somewhere between, I can't remember exactly, but somewhere between 40 and 50% of their sales, even though they make, relatively a small percentage of their customer base. If you look at their repeat customer base and engaged customer base, they're a much higher percentage, but they are a huge portion of their sales. So they offer loyalty perks that are specifically for that segment. And Best Buy does the same thing. They have kind of two loyalty programs. One is geared towards techies. So it's that constant involvement in tech, or people who aren't techies at all and need a lot of technical help. And then the other one is kind of just for your everyday consumer who's coming in to buy a TV, but maybe has a big purchase this year and wants something like free shipping and access to the Geek Squad, for a year. So they understand those different audience segments, and in offering effective loyalty programs for them. Best Buy also actually has other services that aren't kind of loyalty program like the Geek Squad, but that are engendering loyalty and consistent engagement by offering those services. And that's what I was speaking about earlier, is that loyalty as a concept used to be about discounts, but today, if we get rid of the word, really what you're trying to engender and create is experience, emotion, offer those services, offer that ability to have that relationship exchange with that consumer. And then, obviously Sephora, they rocket in loyalty every single year, and are a loyalty program that many retailers and brands have copied. Things like I mentioned, their birthday earlier, the ability to, really cater to that need specifically to that data ask is phenomenal. And then offering replenishment capabilities that are geared towards your specific personalized use of that item. So,
yeah, no, I think totally agree. Those are great program examples. And I do think, as you said earlier, it's really starting to rethink the loyalty program as about the full experience, not just I'm going to give a discount if you bought a certain amount. And that's really a big change. It makes it a lot harder for the retailer. It's not as simple as it used to be, but at the same time, it creates a lot more value for the consumer, which hopefully will drive business forward. Let's look at, before we do answer a few questions, in terms of the polls, we asked, does your company have a loyalty program? So 2/3 of the folks on the call said yes to that. Second question, poll question was, are you currently, or do you see yourself using SMS in your cross-channel marketing strategy this year? Again, interestingly, a large number said yes to this, 83%. And then if I figure out how to scroll down here well. And then the third question we asked is, what channel are you investing primarily for the remainder of this year? So the website was the top at 50%. Then we had mobile at 33%, social at 17%, and unfortunately, it looks like email and SMS are not as popular. So maybe this webinar will change some of your minds about that. But why don't we jump into a few questions? Laura, we've had a few come in. Maybe one I saw a little earlier came in, and question was, what are some of the strategies for more effective browse abandonment campaigns? I don't know if you have a few thoughts on that.
Sure. So in the context of browse abandonment, there's a few things that we want to think about with personalization. And actually, we have a whole list of attributes on the RPI around this. But you want to try to personalize the product for what that person or that customer is most likely to be purchasing. So let's say they browse abandon 3 different products. So how do you choose what goes in the subject line? How do you choose what the hero image is? How do you choose what that content is that accompanies it? So you should have, the capabilities are out there today. Your ESP should be able to offer you the ability to algorithmically decide which of those hero images goes of those 3 products based on which of them the customer is most likely to buy. So that's the first part, is really being smart about choosing that. How you are targeting that subject line and that message. Another element would be content. So when somebody is browsing something, let's say a skirt, yes, it's great to offer accompanying shirts and accessories that go along with that skirt, but maybe also like how to wear this skirt to, I don't know what level it is, a cocktail party, or how to wear this to a wedding, or how to style this for day into night, content that accompanies that product. That again is AI enabled. You can get that content pulled in from your content library and attached to that. And then I think the other component to it is really showing them, and here we go back to that kind of UGC or helping them understand the community that they're in and who is wearing this type of item or using this type of item. This is huge in the footwear industry, but showing people wearing that actual item, so users who have posted it, and use top user reviews, so 5-star reviews of this shoe or of this skirt, and showing those. Those are all 3 keys that really win in browse and cart abandon.
That's great. Why don't we, so we had a question came in, this is a favorite of mine because I've done a lot of work in loyalty and get this question a lot. Can you talk a bit about the effectiveness of paid loyalty programs and how well those work? So, for example, things like Amazon Prime or Walmart Plus or others. Laura, I'll let you kick off. And I've actually done a little research on this, so I'll share a few results in a minute.
Okay, cool. I think this is where we go back to understanding who your customer base is and the value for what you're offering. So Home Depot, for instance, with the 2 different offerings that they have, that is really understand exactly what they want the customer to be able to get, what they need to ask of the customer, and how they're going to engender this. Amazon, what they are offering through that, or Walmart Plus, what they are offering through that is essentially the ability to not have to charge for shipping. Now, as a consumer, I think of this as, hey, I'm engaging with you enough times that if I had to pay anywhere, from $5.99 to $12.99 to shipping, I'm going to calculate how much that is over the course of the year. And that makes sense. If you are somebody who has a customer conversion cycle, let's say department stores, that's much longer, where they're only potentially purchasing from you 4 times a year, even the most loyal aren't even purchasing more than, I don't know, maybe 10 times a year from you, then something like a paid program for shipping doesn't really make sense. Now, would a paid program for special access to, boxes that are delivered from a VIP shopper, who does everything for you, a la Stitch Fix, yes, that makes sense because the value you're adding there is I don't have to go in and make that selection myself. I don't understand what fits my body type. I don't know how to mix things together. I don't know what's in style right now, or I just want someone else to do it for me and I don't have time for it. So it's really figuring out what it is you're trying to provide and then how much value is associated to that customer from, a monetary perspective on whether it makes sense for it to be a paid program or not.
That's great. And I'll throw out just a few things for some research I've done, the last few years into the paid space. And a couple of things we find is that on the economic side, it can be an interesting way of it's a good way if you have a benefit you can't afford to give for free. I think it's why you see shipping so often included in it, right? Because shipping's expensive. If you don't want to give everyone free shipping, you can make it part of a paid program, and then at least it defrays your costs. And it can have some, I think Amazon found shipping can be a great inducement once people have that to buy more and more, but it is a way of defraying some of the costs. I will say one thing we did find in our research that I've done is consumers find these programs a bit more transactional in the sense that they're pretty clear they have at least a mental sense of the value they get for what they pay. And it's around 50% is the expectation. So if I'm paying $100, I sort of expect to get about $150 in value back. And that can be however I'm calculating it. So it might be how much value do I put on shipping or video or other benefits, style advice I'm getting. But you have to think very clearly. It's a little different than a free program where maybe there's a bit more flexibility. So when people are paying, they're going to cancel if they don't feel they're getting, about a 50% bump in terms of value against what they're paying. And so you definitely need to keep that in mind. It's a little different mindset than maybe in a free program where the bar's not quite so high. We're a bit over in terms of time, so I did want to wrap up. Laura, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I did want to note that if you have your phone out, in the thank you page, you can see a QR code. If you scan that could take you right to the RPI for 2020. If you want to see how your brand did, or a brand that you follow that you want to see where they found out on the list. And certainly, if you have more questions later, feel free to reach out to myself, to Laura, to the teams here at Coresight or Sail Through, and we'd be happy to chat more with you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone's time today, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, everyone.